I'm Haley Hilton, 47, and I spent 2 decades in Navy Special Operations, planning the missions that brought other people's sons home, and never once asking for the credit. For 15 years, I have come quietly to a memorial wall to honor the one I could not bring home. But when a captain who never knew him tried to have me thrown out of his own memorial, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea who you really were? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand quietly in your own truth while someone tried to push you out of it, hit that like button and subscribe. There's a name carved into a wall of polished black stone, and for 15 years, I have driven across 3 states to put my hand on it. I always park a half-mile out and walk the rest. I always come early, before the chairs are set and the program is printed, before anyone with a clipboard decides who's allowed to grieve. And I always come in a plain wool coat, no rank on my collar, nothing on me that would tell a stranger what I have spent my life doing. The man whose name is on that wall never cared what was on my collar. He cared whether my plans brought his people home. So I come to him the way he knew me, as a person and not a rank, and I leave one white flower under the letters of his name. His name is Andre Webb. The year he died, 2011, I was 33 years old and a lieutenant commander, and I was the officer who planned the operation that killed him. I do not say that to punish myself. I say it because it is true, and because the truth is the only thing I have ever owned outright. I planned it, I led it from the operations floor, and when it went the way the worst nights go, I was the one who walked up a gravel driveway and told his father to his face. That part matters more than any of the rest, and I will come back to it. I should tell you how Andre and I became what we became, because you cannot understand why a wall matters to me unless you understand that I did not start out belonging to that world. I came up through Navy intelligence. I was good with maps and patterns and the slow, unglamorous work of figuring out where a problem actually lived. In 2007, when I was 29, I was assigned as the Operations and Targeting Officer to a Naval Special Warfare Task Unit, which is a polite way of saying I was the only woman in a planning bay full of men who broke down doors for a living and did not, at first, see what use I was. They had a name for me before they knew my name: the Spreadsheet Officer. I heard it through a door that was not closed all the way, and I did not let it land on my face. I had been underestimated by experts. A planning bay full of tired operators was not going to be the thing that finally got to me. I did my work, I built target packages that were tighter and truer than what they were used to, and slowly the men stopped saying Spreadsheet Officer and started saying ma'am, and a few of them started saying it like they meant it. The first one who meant it was a chief named Andre Webb. He was built like a door himself, quiet in the way that genuinely dangerous people often are, and he watched me for about 3 weeks before he said a single word to me that was not strictly professional. Then one night, after a rehearsal, where my plan had quietly fixed a problem that would have gotten people hurt, he sat down across from me with 2 cups of bad coffee and pushed one toward me. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't care that you don't kick the doors. You're the reason we find the right door. That counts. Around here, that counts more than almost anything." I have been given medals since then. None of them ever landed the way those 4 sentences landed. He was telling me I belonged, and he was the kind of man whose word on the subject was final, and the whole bay knew it. After that, we built something. Not romance, nothing like it. We built the thing that men and women who trust each other with lives build, which is a shorthand. Long planning nights turned into a rhythm. He taught me to read a room of exhausted men, to know when a team was actually ready and when they were just saying they were ready because they were too proud to say otherwise. I taught him to read a problem nobody else in the room could see yet, to trust the pattern even when his gut wanted to kick a different door. We argued the way people argue when they both care more about getting it right than about being right. And every time we got it right, somebody came home who might not have. There was one night in particular in the late winter of 2009 that I think about more than the rest. I had spent 11 days building a target package that everyone above me wanted to act on immediately, and I had stood in front of those men and told them the package was wrong. Not incomplete, wrong. The pattern did not hold, and if we moved on it, we would put a team into a building that was not the building we thought it was. It is one thing to say that in a briefing. It is another thing to say it when your reputation is the only thing standing between a room full of armed men and the mission they have been straining toward for almost 2 weeks. I held the line. I was a lieutenant commander, the only woman in the room, telling a unit full of operators to stand down, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Andre was the one who broke it. He stood up, slow, and he looked around at the rest of them, and he said, simply, "If she says it's the wrong door, it's the wrong door, and we are not kicking it." And they stood down. 4 days later, we found the right building, and everyone who walked into it walked back out. That is what he gave me. He gave me the room. He gave me his credibility as cover for my judgment again and again, until my judgment did not need cover anymore. I gave that unit everything I had: sleepless precision, total commitment. No spotlight because I did not want one, and the work did not allow one. The kind of officer I chose to be was the kind in the back of the room, the one who makes the plan work and then stands in the dark while the people who carried it out get the photographs and the handshakes. That was not a sacrifice to me. That was the job, and I loved the job, and I loved the men who let me be useful to them. I met Andre's father at a homecoming in 2009. Calvin Webb was a Vietnam-era veteran, lean and upright and watchful, the kind of old soldier who sizes you up in about 4 seconds and is almost never wrong. He shook my hand and held it a beat too long and looked at me the way his son did, like he was deciding whether I was real. Then he said something I have carried every day since. "If anything ever happens to that boy," he said, "you tell me yourself. Not a chaplain, not a phone call from some office. You. I want it from the person who sent him," looking me in the eye. I told him I would. I did not hesitate, because Andre was the best of them, and the idea that anything would happen to him felt, in that bright, loud room full of returning men, almost impossible. I made the promise the way you make a promise you do not expect to have to keep. 2 years later, I kept it on a gravel driveway in the rain, and the keeping of it became the spine of everything I am. So when I tell you that I drive across 3 states every year to stand at a wall, understand that I am not performing grief. I am keeping a different promise, the quiet one underneath the loud one. I am telling Andre, the only way left to tell him, that I still come. That counts. Around here, it counts more than almost anything. That morning, the morning all of this happened, I laid the plain coat out on my bed before the sun was up, and I drove, and I parked a half-mile out, and I walked, with one white flower in my hand, toward a name I had touched for 15 years. I did not know that this year, for the first time, a man I had never met was going to stand between me and that name, and decide I had not earned the right to reach it. 3 weeks before the memorial, I learned I had been selected for Rear Admiral. The lower half, the first star, the thing that a certain kind of officer spends an entire career angling toward. I read the message twice, and then I sat very still in my office. And the feeling that came was not the feeling I was supposed to have. Selection is supposed to feel like an arrival. It felt like a spotlight finding me in a room where I had spent 20 years learning to stand in the dark. I had built a whole self out of being unseen. Being unseen was not a wound for me. It was a discipline, a way of keeping the work clean, a way of making sure that nothing I did was ever about me. A star changes that. A star is a thing people look at. I sat in my office and understood that I was being promoted into visibility. And I did not want it, and I felt vaguely ashamed of not wanting it, because women like me are supposed to want it on behalf of all the women who could not have it. Tessa Nolan called me that night. Tessa is a lieutenant commander now, and she has been my closest friend in this service for the better part of 2 decades, which means she is one of about 3 people on Earth allowed to tell me the truth without softening it. She congratulated me, and she meant it. And then she got quiet in the way she gets when she is deciding whether to say a hard thing. "You're going to hate the memorial this year," she said finally. I asked her what she meant. "There's a new officer running it, Captain Drew. He's making it a production, Haley. Honor guard, a printed program, a guest list at the wall. He wants it televised. Propelled rope demonstration, the whole circus. You're going to walk up there in that sad little coat of yours, and you're going to hate every minute of it." I did not say anything for a moment. The wall had always been a quiet place. A place you came to early, alone, and stood, and left. The idea of a guest list at a wall of dead men struck me as close to obscene, though I knew that was not fair to the people who organized these things with good intentions. "Who is he?" I asked. "Drew. Dane Drew. Good officer. On paper. Conventional command track. Ticket puncher. Ambitious in the way that gets you commands. Never deployed on anything like what you and Andre did. He knows the names on that wall the way you know lyrics to a song you've never felt." She paused. "He's not a bad man, Haley. He just thinks the wall is a stage. I have known 100 men like the one she described, and most of them grow out of it, and a few of them never do, and there's no telling which kind you have until something goes wrong in front of them." I thanked Tessa, and I told her I would see her there, and I hung up. The world I have lived in my whole adult life is split down the middle, and the split has nothing to do with rank. On one side are the people who do the quiet work. On the other are the people who perform it for an audience. The quiet ones build the plan, carry the wounded, sit with the families, and never mention it again. The performers find a camera and a crowd and a way to stand in front of the thing that other people did. Most careers contain a little of both, and you forgive that, because everyone needs to be seen sometimes. But the wall was supposed to be the one place where only the quiet side existed. The wall was for the people who could not be seen anymore, by the people who had loved them in private. A guest list, a cordon, a man who treated the names as a script. I lay awake longer than I should have, turning it over, and I made a decision that felt, at the time, like the simplest thing in the world. I would come the way I always come. Early, plain-clothed, unannounced. I would not put my name on a list to mourn my own friend. I had never needed permission to grieve him before. I did not see why this year should be different. That was the warning sign, and I missed it, because I was reading the situation as a matter of taste rather than a matter of conflict. I thought the worst that could happen was that I would find the whole thing distasteful and leave early. I did not understand that when you decide to walk past a man who has built his entire morning around controlling who passes him, you are not avoiding a confrontation. You are scheduling one. The new rank did not change my plan for the morning. If anything, it hardened it. I had spent 20 years not using my position to get things I had not earned the plain way. And I was not about to start by flashing a star to get to a wall I had been visiting since before Dane Drew ever heard the name Andre Webb. I laid out the plain coat. I bought the white flower from the same stand I always use, the one near the highway where the woman knows my face, but not my name, and likes me better for the mystery. And the night before, lying in the dark, I told myself that nothing about my ritual would change. The audience, if I had been honest with myself, already knew otherwise. The memorial grounds sit on a low rise behind one of the older buildings on the installation. A curve of black granite set into a garden. The names of the fallen cut deep enough to read with your fingertips in the dark. I have stood there at every hour. I know which name catches the morning light first. I know exactly where Andre's name sits, third row, left of center, at the height of my heart when I stand straight, which I have always believed was an accident and have always chosen to treat as a kindness. I arrived early, the way I planned, but this year early was not early enough, because the production had its own clock. There were stanchions and velvet ropes where there had never been ropes. There was a riser with a podium. There were young sailors in dress uniforms, positioning chairs with rulers, practically, and a public affairs team running cable, and a cordon, an actual cordon, between the gathering area and the wall itself. I stood at the edge of it in my plain coat with my white flower and felt something cold move through me because the wall was behind a line now and I was on the wrong side of it. A young petty officer at the cordon saw me coming. He had the open, slightly anxious face of a kid who has been told to enforce a rule he does not fully understand. He glanced at my coat, at my empty hands, except for the flower, at my face, and I watched him almost wave me through on instinct because something in him recognized that I was not a tourist. Then a voice cut across the open ground. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back." Captain Dane Drew was exactly what Tessa had described and exactly what I had pictured, which is its own kind of disappointment. Trim, polished, a seal trident on a service uniform pressed to a knife edge. The easy authority of a man who has never once been on the wrong side of a cordon in his life. He crossed to me with the brisk stride of someone defending a perimeter, and he looked at my plain coat, and he made the calculation that men like him make in half a second, and he got it completely wrong. "This area is restricted until the ceremony begins," he said. "Military only. Civilians don't belong here. This isn't a tourist stop." I have been spoken to in a great many tones by a great many men. This one was not even cruel exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was dismissive, the tone you use for a problem you intend to solve quickly and then forget. He had already half turned away from me, certain the matter was closed. "I only need a minute," I said. My voice was very level. I had a lifetime of practice keeping it level. "One name. I'll be gone before your guests arrive." "There's a process, ma'am. There's a guest list. If your name's on it, you'll be seated at the appropriate time." He said it the way you read a sign aloud to someone you have decided is slow. "My name isn't on a list," I said. "It's never been on a list. I've been coming here for 15 years. Something in that should have stopped him. A flicker of it crossed the young petty officer's face. But Drew had a morning to run, and an audience arriving, and a woman in a sad coat standing in the middle of his clean perimeter, and he made the decision that was going to follow him for the rest of his career. He lifted 2 fingers toward the security detail at the edge of the garden. "Get her out," he said. "Walk her back to the public lot." A hand closed around my upper arm. Not roughly, but firmly, the grip of someone who has been told to move a person and intends to do it. And here's the thing I want you to understand, because it is the only part of that morning I am proud of. I did not resist. I did not raise my voice. I did not say the word that would have ended it in an instant, the word that was sitting right there in my mouth, the rank, the role, the truth of who I was. I said none of it. I had carried a folded flag to that wall 15 years ago. I had planned the operation whose dead were cut into that stone. Now, a man who had never smelled cordite on the worst night of those men's lives was deciding I had not earned a minute beside them. And I said nothing, because saying nothing was the only dignity left on the table. And dignity was the one thing he could not take from me without my permission. The security man began to turn me toward the parking lot. The white flower was still in my hand. And then Captain Dane Drew's phone rang. He almost did not answer it. I saw him reach to silence it. Irritated, a man interrupted mid-task. Then he saw the name on the screen, and his whole body changed, the way a body changes when the call is from somewhere above you that you cannot send to voicemail. He stepped 2 paces away and turned his back and put the phone to his ear. And the security man paused with his hand still on my arm, waiting, because everyone in that garden could feel the air change. I could not hear the first part. I did not need to. I have watched men receive bad news from their chain of command on 100 operations floors, and the language of it is written in the spine. Drew's shoulders came up, his free hand pressed flat against his thigh. And then the voice on the other end of the line got loud enough, or the morning got quiet enough, that I heard 4 words come through the phone, clear as a bell. "Release her, sir. Now." It was the Chief of Staff to Rear Admiral Gregory Saylor, the group commander. I would learn that later. In the moment, all I knew was that Dane Drew had gone very still, and that the voice was not finished. "Do you have any idea," the voice said, lower now, but I caught the shape of it, "who you are holding?" The hand came off my arm. Drew turned around slowly. The color had drained out of his face in a way I had seen before. On men who realize mid-sentence that they have made a mistake they cannot take back. He looked at me, at the plain coat and the white flower and the level eyes, and I watched him understand that he did not know who I was, and that everyone who mattered apparently did. He was still searching for words when the whole room turned, because someone else had decided the moment did not belong to Dane Drew anymore. There was an old man near the front of the gathering area, broad through the shoulders even now, with the kind of bearing that 50 years of standing a certain way will give a body. Retired Master Chief Roy James had been watching the entire thing. He had served under me in 2011. He had been on the operation. He had come home from the night that Andre Webb did not, and he had carried that home with him every day since, the way the rest of us carry it. He did not shout. Roy James has never had to shout a day in his life. He simply began to walk straight across the open ground that the velvet ropes had made, and every head in that garden turned to follow him, because a man like that does not cross a room toward someone for no reason. He came to a stop directly in front of me, close, deliberate. putting his own body between me and the security detail without ever touching anyone. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was rough and quiet and absolutely steady. "It's good to see you again. I've got it from here." And he reached out gently and lifted the security guard's hand the last inch away from my arm and set it aside the way you move something that does not belong where it has been put. The crowd read the deference in him instantly. You cannot fake what Roy James was doing. You cannot perform that kind of respect. The whole garden understood, in a single held breath, that the woman the captain had just tried to throw out was someone in front of whom a retired Master Chief would cross a room and stand at something close to attention. Dane Drew lowered the phone. He was looking at me like a man reading a word he had mispronounced his entire life. Finally hearing it said correctly. For 15 years I had wanted exactly one thing from that wall. A minute. Now I was going to get it, but the minute was going to come, wrapped in 200 faces, realizing all at once who I was. And there was no way left to give that back. Roy James walked me the last few steps to the wall himself, one hand hovering near my shoulder without landing, the way you escort someone you would die for. The program had simply stopped. Nobody had announced anything. The riser stood empty, and the podium stood empty, and the velvet ropes stood there looking suddenly absurd, and 200 people watched an old Master Chief walk a woman in a plain coat to a name carved in black stone. He told the officers nearest the front, quietly, what they were looking at. I heard fragments of it. Task Unit 2011, the operations commander, the one who planned it. I watched them do the arithmetic, their eyes going from my face to the wall and back, landing on the name third row, left of center, and I watched the understanding arrive. I never wanted them to know. I want to be clear about that because I think it is the part that is hardest to believe. I did not stay invisible for 20 years out of false modesty. I stayed invisible because the work is cleaner when it is not about you, and because the men I served deserved a planner whose ego was not in the room with them. I wanted the minute. The minute was all I had ever wanted. But the minute came wrapped in their faces, realizing, and there's no giving that back. You cannot unring it. You can only stand inside it and try not to flinch. Then there was movement at the edge of the crowd, slow movement, a man working his way forward on a cane, and my throat closed before I even saw his face, because I knew that gate. I had walked beside it on a gravel driveway in the rain. Calvin Webb was almost 80 now. The lean upright frame had bent a little. The watchful eyes had not changed at all. He came through the parting crowd one careful step at a time, and people moved out of his way without being asked, the way people always move for the genuine article, and he stopped in front of me and reached up and put his hand on my shoulder. The same hand that had once held mine a beat too long in a loud, bright room. "You came," he said. He said it to me, but his voice carried, because he wanted it to carry. "You always come, every year. Rain, snow, that one year your flight got canceled and you drove all night." He turned his head, just slightly, taking in the riser and the ropes and the white-faced captain. I told them years ago, the officer who brought my boy home does not need a list. She does not need a chair. She has stood at this wall more times than any man holding a clipboard today. You could have heard a pin drop on grass. Dane Drew came toward me then. To his credit, he came. A weaker man would have found something urgent to do at the far end of the garden. He stopped a respectful distance away, and he started into an apology that was half genuine and half the reflexive protocol of an officer who has just realized he has stepped on a landmine. "Captain, I had no idea. The list, the procedure. I was only—" I stopped him. Not cruelly. I had no appetite for cruelty, standing where I was standing, with Calvin Webb's hand on my shoulder. "You weren't wrong to guard this wall, Captain," I said. "You were wrong about who needed guarding from whom." Then I turned my back on him, gently, finally, and I looked at the name, and I put my hand against the cool stone the way I had for 15 years, and for a little while I let the rest of them disappear. That evening I sat in Tessa Nolan's kitchen and did not feel the way I was apparently supposed to feel. There was no triumph in me. There was a flat, scraped-out tiredness, the feeling you get after a fall you manage not to die from. Tessa poured 2 glasses of something and sat across from me and watched me not drink mine. He didn't take anything from you, she said. You know that, right? You're still you. The wall's still the wall. He just made a fool of himself in front of everyone who matters. I know, I said. And I did know it. But there was something underneath it that I was still finding words for. He didn't take anything, I said slowly. But he made me prove something I never wanted to prove. For 15 years, I got to be nobody at that wall. I got to be just a woman in a coat who comes to see her friend. He made me be the operations commander in front of 200 people who will never look at me the same way again. That's gone now. That privacy. That's its own kind of theft, even if he didn't mean to steal it. I told her the rest of it then, the part I had not said to anyone, that for 15 years the wall had been the one place on earth where I did not have to be strong. Everywhere else I was the planner, the commander, the steady one, the woman who did not flinch. At the wall, I got to be the person who had loved Andre Webb and lost him and never quite stopped carrying the weight of having sent him. I got to be soft there, in private, in a plain coat, with no one watching. And a man with a clipboard and a guest list had reached into the one place I kept, that softness, and dragged it out into the daylight in front of 200 people. And he had not even known he was doing it. That was the part that sat wrong, not the insult, the exposure. Tessa was quiet for a while. She is good at being quiet. It is one of the reasons I have loved her for 20 years. So what do you want to do about him? She finally asked. I did not answer right away. On the table in front of me was a second white flower, the twin of the one I had finally laid at the wall, the one I had bought out of habit and not needed. I turned it over in my fingers and thought about Andre. Who would have had an opinion about all of this? A loud and profane and probably correct opinion. And I thought about Calvin, whose hand I could still feel on my shoulder, and I thought about a man whose face had gone white when a voice on a phone told him the truth. I don't know yet, I said. But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to let this be about me. That's the one thing I won't allow. The next morning, the machinery of the institution started moving faster than I wanted it to. By 0900, I had a message asking me to come see Rear Admiral Gregory Saylor, the group commander, the man whose chief of staff had made the phone call. I went. You do not decline that invitation, star, coming or not. Saylor was a serious man behind a serious desk, and he was mortified, genuinely, on behalf of his command. He came around the desk to greet me, which officers of his rank do not do unless they mean something by it. Captain Hilton, he said, I owe you an apology that the United States Navy cannot adequately put into words, and I intend to try anyway. I told him the apology was not necessary, that the matter was already closed as far as I was concerned. He did not accept that. He told me he was prepared to relieve Dane Drew of the memorial detail immediately, and put a formal letter in his file, the kind of letter that quietly ends the part of a career that involves being trusted with anything that matters. Say the word, Saylor said, and he is done running anything of consequence. After what he did to you, in front of those families, no one in this command would blink. Frankly, most of them would cheer. And there it was, the thing I had spent the night deciding about. A man who had humiliated me had been handed to me, and I was being invited to close my hand. I declined. I watched it confuse him, and I did not blame him for being confused. Most people, given a clean shot at someone who has wronged them, take it, and call it justice, and sleep fine. I had a different math. Sir, I said, if I end Captain Drew's career over this, then the story of that morning becomes a story about me. About a captain who got disrespected and made a man pay. And I have spent 20 years making sure that nothing at that wall is ever about me. I let that sit. I did not spend 2 decades staying invisible so that I could finally become the headline by ending one man's career. That is not who I am, and it is not what Andre Webb is for. Saylor looked at me for a long moment, the way men of real quality look at you when you have said something they did not expect and find they respect. Then what do you want? He asked. Because I am not going to do nothing. I can't. I told him what I wanted. I wanted the memorial to stop being a production, no cordon between the families and the names, no guest list at the wall, no riser, no velvet rope, no clipboard, standing between a father and his son. I wanted the ceremony returned to the thing it was supposed to be, a quiet place where the people who could not be seen anymore were visited by the people who had loved them in private. I asked him to put it in writing as command policy, and then I asked for the one thing that surprised him most. I want Captain Drew to be the one who reads the new policy aloud next year, I said. At the wall, to the families. Sailor's eyebrows went up. You want the man who got it wrong to administer the very thing he got wrong. I want him to learn it, I said. Firing him teaches him nothing except that he got caught. Making him stand up in front of those families every year and say out loud what this place is for, that might actually teach him. That might make him into the officer he thinks he already is. There was pushback, of course. There is always pushback. A public affairs officer wanted to build a tidy story out of the whole thing, the wronged hero, the corrected injustice, a press release with my name in it and a flattering photograph. I told that officer no, and I told them no in a tone that ended the conversation. I would not be made into a victim for the cameras any more than I would let myself be made into a trophy. A few well-meaning officers kept circling back, certain I would change my mind about Drew once the shock wore off, certain that mercy was just a delayed reaction. It was not. I had buried enough people to know the difference between justice and spectacle, and I wanted no part of the second one. Before I left his office, Sailor asked me one more question, and it was not an official one. He asked me why I kept coming. He said he had read enough of the file by then to know what that night had cost, and he wanted to understand why a person would drive across 3 states every single year to stand at the site of the worst thing that had ever happened to them. It was a fair question. Most people run from the place where they lost someone. I told him the truth. I told him that I did not come to the wall to remember that Andre died. I came to remember that he lived and that he chose to spend part of the time he had on this earth trusting me with his life. And that the only way I knew to honor a trust like that was to keep showing up to the one place where I could still feel the weight of it. Grief that you run from turns into a ghost, I told him. Grief that you visit turns into a kind of company. Sailor was quiet for a moment, and then he stood and walked me to the door himself, and he did not say anything else, because there was nothing else worth saying. Sailor signed the new memorial policy that week. I signed nothing. I gave no statement. When the meeting ended, I walked out of his headquarters the same way I had walked in. Unphotographed, in a plain coat, a woman nobody in the lobby looked at twice. That was exactly how I wanted it. The star was coming whether I liked it or not, but for one more walk across one more lobby, I got to be nobody, and I savored it. Consequences found Dane Drew anyway. They always do when a man's reputation has been running ahead of his understanding for years and the gap finally gets exposed in public. I did not lift a finger to make it happen. I did not have to. The story of that morning traveled on its own, the way these stories do, passed quietly from operator to operator and family to family, and it lost nothing in the telling. Within a week, everyone who had been on or near the 2011 operation knew that Captain Dane Drew had tried to have the task unit's operations commander physically removed from the memorial to her own fallen. The people whose respect he actually wanted, the quiet ones, the ones who had carried wounded and sat with widows, looked at him differently now, and he could feel it. It showed up in small ways which are the only ways that truly land. A silence when he walked into a wardroom that had been full of conversation a second before. An old chief who had bled on that deployment and who now, when Drew extended a hand, looked at it just a half-second too long before taking it. So that everyone present understood the half-second. Nobody was rude to him. Rudeness would have let him off easy, would have given him something to be wronged by. Instead, they were simply perfectly correct with him, and correctness from people who used to be warm is its own quiet sentence. The worst of it for him, Tessa said, was not the silences and the half-second handshakes. It was a thing that happened at a retirement dinner, a few weeks after the memorial. Drew stood up to offer a toast, the way the senior officer present is expected to, and he raised his glass and started in on the usual words about service and sacrifice. And partway through, he realized that the room had gone still in the particular way a room goes still when nobody believes the person speaking has the standing to say what they're saying. He finished the toast. He sat down, and the old chief 2 seats over leaned to his neighbor and said something quiet that made the table laugh, not cruelly, just enough, and Drew heard it land and understood that he had become, in that community, a cautionary tale. A man who had stood in front of the dead and not known their names. That is a hard thing to become among people who measure each other by exactly that. I heard about all of it, secondhand, from Tessa, and I want to tell you honestly that I took no pleasure in it. I had wanted him to learn. I had not wanted him to drown. There's a difference between the two, and I have lowered enough flag-draped boxes into the ground to know which one I was rooting for. A part of me even worried for him, the way you worry for anyone you have watched walk into a fire of their own making, even when they lit themselves. What turned it, in the end, was that Dane Drew did the one thing I did not expect a man like him to do. He went looking for the truth instead of hiding from it. He pulled the after-action record of the 2011 operation. He had clearance. It was not hard for him to access. But access and willingness are different things, and most men in his position would have left that file closed, would have preferred the comfortable blur of not knowing exactly what they had stood in front of. Drew opened it. He read the whole thing, the planning annexes, the timeline, the casualty report. He read about a senior chief named Andre Webb and exactly how the night had gone wrong and exactly what it had cost. And on the command line of the operation plan, in the block that names the officer responsible for the whole thing, he read my name. I picture him sitting alone with that file long after the building had emptied out, the performance finally draining out of him. A man learning for the first time the real weight of a wall he had treated as a stage. I picture it because Roy James told me about it later, and because I needed to believe it was true. Because the next thing Drew did was find Roy James. He sought out the retired Master Chief, the man who had crossed that garden for me, and he asked him the question he should have asked before he ever raised his voice at a woman in a plain coat. "Tell me about that night," Drew said. "Tell me who she was, who she really was. I want to understand what I did." And Roy James, who does not waste words and does not suffer fools, looked at him for a long moment, decided the asking was real, and told him. All of it, the planning, the night, the driveway in the rain. By the time he was finished, I am told, Captain Dane Drew was not the same man who had pointed 2 fingers at a security detail and said, "Get her out." That was the beginning of his real education, and it started, as all real education does, with a man finally admitting how little he knew. He did not get to walk back into my good opinion. I want to be clear about that, because this is not the kind of story where one good gesture wipes a slate clean. Trust is not rebuilt by a single afternoon of reading a file. It is rebuilt slowly in the dark by a person doing the right thing over and over when no one is watching to give him credit for it. That is the only currency I have ever accepted, and Dane Drew was going to have to earn his way toward that wall in it, one quiet act at a time. He started with a letter, not an email, not a text, not a public statement on some official channel where the apology could be seen and admired. A handwritten letter on plain paper that arrived at my office in an envelope with no rank and no flourish. I almost did not open it, and then I did. It did not ask for anything. That was the first thing I noticed and the thing that made me keep reading. There was no request for forgiveness, no please understand, no list of mitigating circumstances. He simply told me what he had learned. He told me he had read the file. He told me he understood now that he had stood in front of the operations commander and called her a tourist, and that he had no defense for it and was not going to construct one. He told me he had spent his career believing that guarding something and understanding it were the same thing, and that he had been wrong about that his whole life, and that he was sorry in the plain way that men who are actually sorry are sorry without decoration. I read it twice. Then I put it in a drawer, and I did not answer it. Not out of cruelty, out of honesty. A return letter, prompt and gracious, would have closed the matter too cleanly, would have let both of us off the hook. Trust is not built by return mail. I made him wait because the waiting was true, and because anything I did before he had actually changed would have been a performance, and I was done with performances. What Drew did during the waiting is the only reason the story has the ending it has. He did the work where no one could see it. He drove out to Calvin Webb's house, the same gravel driveway I had walked up in the rain 15 years before, and he knocked on the door of a man whose son he had never met and whose memorial he had nearly desecrated, and he asked if he could listen. Calvin let him in. They sat on the porch for 2 hours. Drew did not take a single photograph. He did not post about it. He just listened to an old man talk about his boy. And at the end of it, he thanked him and drove away. And the only reason I know it happened at all is that Calvin called me that night to tell me. "He came to my porch," Calvin said. "He listened for 2 hours and he didn't take a single photo and he didn't make a single promise he can't keep. That's a start, Haley. I'm old enough to know a start when I see one. When I finally agreed to meet Drew, I kept it short and I kept it direct. We met at the wall because that was the only place the meeting meant anything. He stood there in his service uniform, hands at his sides, and waited for whatever I had come to say. I did not soften it. Softening it would have insulted the work he had started to do. You don't owe me anything, Captain, I said. I told you that much at the wall, and I meant it. I turned and looked at the names, the whole black curve of them. You owe them. Every name on this stone. You stood in front of them like a doorman, and you didn't know a single story behind a single letter. So here's the only apology I will ever accept from you, and I want you to understand it is going to take you years. Guard this wall by knowing it. Learn the men. Learn how they lived, and how they died, and who they left behind. That's it. That's the whole sentence. He took it the way you take an order you intend to follow. No bargaining. He asked me one question, and it was the right question. May I walk you to the wall sometime? He asked. Next year, when you come. You may, I said. You can name 3 men on this wall and tell me how each of them died. Until then, you stand at the back where I used to stand. He started studying that night. Roy James told me he requested every after-action file the command would clear him for. He was learning the dark. It would be a long time before I trusted him at my shoulder, and we both knew it, and the knowing was the healthiest thing about it. Time did what time does. The seasons turned, and the things that had been raw scabbed over into something I could carry without bleeding, and the trajectories of all of us settled into their new shapes. They pinned the star on me in the late autumn. I asked for the smallest ceremony the regulations would permit. They offered me a hall. I asked for a room with 12 chairs, and then I asked them to take one out, because I have never liked an empty seat I cannot fill with someone who earned it. And there was one seat in particular that no one alive could fill. Tessa was there. Roy James was there, in a suit that strained across his shoulders, looking proud and uncomfortable in equal measure. Calvin Webb could not travel by then, but he sent a note, and I read it that night alone. And it is none of your business what it said, except that it was the best thing anyone said to me about that star. The rank did not change how I show up at the wall. I still come early, in the plain coat, before I am an admiral, before I am anything but a woman with a white flower and a promise to keep. The star rides in the car. It does not come to the wall. The wall does not care about stars. I will tell you a small thing about that first promotion that I have told almost no one. After they pinned it on, after the 11 chairs and the one I had taken away, a young lieutenant came up to me, an intelligence officer, brand new, the kind of earnest that has not yet been worn down. She told me she had heard the story about the memorial, the version that travels, and she asked me how I had managed to stay quiet, how I had stood there and let a man try to throw me out without saying a word about who I was. I thought about it for a moment, because she deserved a real answer and not a slogan. And I told her that staying quiet was not the achievement. Anyone can stay quiet. The achievement was knowing, all the way down, that the silence cost me nothing real, that the man's opinion of me had no weight because it was built on not knowing me, and that the only people whose opinion could actually wound me were the ones who already knew exactly who I was and loved me anyway. I told her that if she could build that, a true center that did not depend on being seen, then no man with a clipboard would ever be able to take anything from her either. She wrote it down. I hope she keeps it longer than the star. The memorial, 1 year on, was reborn under the policy I had asked Sailor to sign. The cordon was gone. The velvet ropes were gone. The riser was smaller and set off to the side where it belonged. The families came first now, before any official, and the names were read by people who had known the men behind them. And Dane Drew stood up at the front and read the new memorial policy aloud to the gathered families, the very words describing the very thing he had once gotten so completely wrong. He read them well. He had earned the right to read them by then. Slowly, in the dark, the only way the right to anything is ever actually earned. I watched him from the back, where I was standing on purpose, and I felt something that was not forgiveness exactly, but was in the same family as it. Respect, maybe, for the distance a person can travel when they decide to stop performing and start understanding. But the truth underneath the good news is that I was running out of time with the one person who had made the wall matter to me in the first place. Calvin Webb was failing. I could hear it in his voice on the phone, the breath getting shorter, the pauses getting longer. The promise I had made on a homecoming floor in 2009, the quiet one, the one underneath all the others, had an expiration date I could not negotiate. There would come a year when I walked up to that wall and Calvin was not there to put his hand on my shoulder and say, "You came." And I knew it. And there was nothing in my entire arsenal of planning and precision that could do a single thing about it. The night before the anniversary, I went to the wall alone, in the dark, the way I always have. No ceremony, no crowd, just me and the cool stone, and the name third row, left of center, at the height of my heart. And I stood there and I asked myself the question that the whole long ordeal had been circling. The question I had been too busy staying invisible to ask. I had spent 15 years asking how to honor the dead. Standing there in the dark, I finally started asking a harder one. How do you let yourself be honored by the living without losing the part of you that earned it? How do you let them see you, finally, and stay the kind of person who never needed to be seen? I did not have the answer yet. I closed my hand over Andre's name in the dark and let the question hang there, the way you leave a light on for someone who might still come home. The morning of the anniversary, I came before anyone else, the way I always have. But this year there was no cordon to stop me. No velvet rope, no clipboard, no man with 2 raised fingers. I walked straight up to the wall in the gray, early light, in my plain coat, and there was nothing at all between me and the name. I knelt and laid the white flower under the letters of Andre Webb, third row, left of center, and then I stood and I took my minute, the full minute, the one a man had tried to deny me a year before, the one I had been taking in stolen pieces for 15 years. This time, nobody turned. Nobody realized. Nobody did any arithmetic with their eyes. It was quiet, and it was mine, and it was his. The living came as the light grew. Calvin Webb made it, frailer than ever, brought the last stretch in a wheelchair by a grandson, but he made it, and he found my hand. Roy James came in his straining suit. Tessa came and stood at my shoulder and said nothing, which is her gift. And Dane Drew came, and he went to the back where I used to stand. And he stood there, learning the discipline of the unseen. And when our eyes met across the garden, he gave me a single, small nod, and I gave him one back, and that was the whole conversation, and it was enough. Then Calvin did the thing that broke me open in the best possible way. He pulled me down close to his chair, and he told me a story about Andre I had never heard. Something small and ridiculous and human, about a fishing trip and a borrowed truck and a goat, of all things, and the way he told it, with that same watchful steadiness even now, made the whole thing land. And I laughed. I laughed out loud at that wall for the first time in 15 years. The grief did not go anywhere. It just made room, finally, for the joy to sit down beside it. He'd have loved that they tried to throw you out, Calvin said, wiping his own eyes, grinning the grin his son used to grin. Loved it. He'd have laughed for a week, and then, he said, he'd have walked over and decked the man and apologized to you for it later and not meant the apology even a little. I could see it. I could see all of it. And for one bright moment, Andre was almost there. Almost real. The way the people we love stay almost real at the places where we keep showing up for them. We stayed a long while after the others drifted off. Calvin did not want to leave, and I was in no hurry to make him. So we sat together in the growing warmth of the morning, the old man and the woman his son had trusted, and we did not say very much. He told me one more thing before his grandson came to take him home. He said that for 15 years he had worried, quietly, the way fathers worry, that the world would forget Andre, that the name on the wall would become just a name to everyone but him, a set of letters that people walked past on their way to the chairs. And he said that what had happened the year before, the ugly thing, the man trying to throw me out, had cured him of that worry completely. Because the whole community had seen, in one sharp moment, that the name on that wall was attached to a story, big enough that a retired Master Chief would cross a room for it, and a group commander would pick up a phone for it, and a woman would drive across 3 states for 15 straight years to touch it. They will not forget him now, Calvin said. You made sure of that. You did not mean to, but you did. And I held his hand and did not correct him, because he was right, and because some gifts you are allowed to give by accident. So let me leave you with the one thing I actually know, after all of it. If you have ever done the quiet work, the real work, the kind nobody photographs, and then watched someone louder and shinier walk up and stand in front of it like they built it, hear me. You do not have to shout to be true. The truth does not need your volume. It does not need a guest list or a riser or a star on your collar. It just needs you to keep showing up, plainly, faithfully, in whatever your version of the plain code is, for the people and the things that actually matter to you. So keep showing up. Stand in the dark if the dark is where the work is. Let the loud ones have the cameras. The right people, the ones who are there, the ones who count, they always know exactly who you are. And on the morning when it matters most, when you walk up to whatever your wall is, you will find there is nothing left standing between you and the thing you came for. I got my minute, it was 15 years late, and it was quiet, and it was mine. I would not trade the quiet of it for every spotlight ever built. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. It still is not easy to talk about that morning at the wall or the 15 years that led up to it. If this story reached you, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever done the quiet work and then watched someone louder stand in front of it like they built it? Have you ever lost someone you still show up for, year after year, no matter who tries to stop you? And if you had been standing in my shoes that morning, would you have said your rank, or would you have stayed silent the way I did? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while.